Welcome to the June 23rd budget study session. May we have a roll call, please?
Council members Draymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Quintero.
Here. May we have your report?
Today we have the meeting of, it's actually a budget study session, and before us is Director of Administrative Services Finance regarding amendments. Number 1, to standby purchase agreement relating to City of Glendale and the City Finance Authority variable rate demand certificates of, no?
Wrong one already.
Okay, sorry, I brought up the wrong form. This is a budget study session, and for that I'll turn it back over to the City Manager.
Okay, Mr. Scarborough.
Boy, what was he saying? Talk about an ad lib.
Can I leave too? Want to get away? Mr. Mayor, good morning. I'll get started while our city clerk reorganizes himself here. Mr. Mayor, good morning. This is budget study session number 7. I hope there's some positive connection with the number. We left last Tuesday with the consensus of the council and direction that the police department fulfill its obligation of 5% reductions in order to help in balancing the upcoming year's budget. And you asked Acting Chief Ron DePompa to bring you back some recommendations on how that might be accomplished. Without further ado, I'll turn to Chief DePompa. Ron.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager, and Mr. Mayor and council members, good morning. We have shaken the Etch-A-Sketch up and hopefully have not broken it, but we'll come back with some options for you to consider, and we'll get right into it.
Here we go.
There we go. Now, what our task was is that, based on your direction, we were looking at finding an alternative to eliminating a portion of COPS, our Vice detail, our STAR program, our PAL program, and the Explorers. And that would require us to come back with different options that would equate to about $1 million of savings. And needless to say, that's tough to do given our staffing levels and budget resourcing. But here are the options that we want to explore with you. Number 1 is what we're going to recommend that you give strong consideration to. We have option number 2 that will take us back to our whole chart of services to get your specific direction. And then finally, some non-options that we think we ought to steer clear of. Having said that, let me briefly describe what option number 1 is, and it involves some restructuring in the organization, where we're going to really reorganize the functions of COPS, our downtown policing unit, and our high school SRO services. And we'll get into the specifics of how we're going to do that. But let me introduce that by revisiting our strategic plan. We haven't had an opportunity to share that with you in detail yet, and hope to do so in the near future. A tremendous amount of time and effort and work went in the development of that strategic plan, and a couple key themes that came out of that I'd like to share with you that I think sets the stage for going down this path. And that is one very clear theme that came out of that was a need in our organization to do a better job of career development and succession planning, especially in light of pending changes that we'll experience into the future with our command staff. Secondly, was a very loud voice that we needed to get the organization in greater contact with the community. And it was really brought to light through that process that neighborhoods, they know who their community policing officer is, but then beyond that, the next level they need to go to address issues in their neighborhood is essentially the chief of police, and what happened to the whole organization in the middle. And so a very important theme was that we need to find a way to get the middle of the organization, the real operational part of the organization, in contact with the community in a very real, meaningful way. And then the final area that was very important with our strategic plan was a greater, more effective use of technology. And here I'm talking about areas of crime analysis, forensics, DNA, all those things that will help us do a better job policing this community. So, taking those themes, what we're looking to do and explore with you is an area command leadership concept, and I'll explain that momentarily as to what that will entail. But we feel that although it's a radical departure from our traditional paradigm, it may be an opportunity to start heading down this path now, and in doing so, be able to use our minimal resources as effectively as we possibly can, and hopefully minimize some of the consequences of losing personnel. So having said that, what I do want to explore briefly with you before we get into that are some non-options. And it's very easy to sit back and say, well, why don't we just do a hard hiring freeze of patrol officers and other staff? We just won't hire. And I just want to remind everybody that our essential service staffing in patrol is the backbone, it's the core, it's our essential mission. It takes a long time to get police officers hired and recruited and trained. Even once we hire them, the training process is well over a year but before they're effective out there. So any kind of hard hiring freeze on essential service positions erodes away our essential service capability, and that's a dangerous, dangerous thing to do. If you were to tell me to go hire 5 officers today, we wouldn't realize the benefit of those till well after a year, maybe in the 18-month time frame. So it's a long process, and I just wanted to remind everyone of that. The other thing that comes to mind is, well, you have vacancies that occur throughout the organization. Just eliminate them. And that is also a very dangerous thing to do, because whether it's sworn or non-sworn, if you randomly eliminate vacancies throughout the organization, you cripple operational units. And in many of those small operational units, the civilian staff are every bit as important as the sworn staff in carrying out the mission of that unit. So we cripple operational units, and I think even more tragic than that, we leave the community with a false expectation that we can still provide adequate service with that unit. And I don't think that's fair to do to the community, and it's certainly not fair to do to the organization. So we ought not go there. Some would say, well, it's not a popular thing to cut sworn officers, cut civilian staff. And here is... We've showed you the chart that when you look at our 121 civilian personnel, 106 of them are assigned to essential service functions, such as running 911 communications, running our jail facility, which is the 3rd busiest jail in LA County, running our records, which supports everything we do. We can't do basic patrol without 24/7 support in handling the records. So what it means to us, if we cut those staff, we simply would have to backfill them with sworn officers, taking them off the streets or out of important units, crime-fighting units. And that's what some agencies do. Not to throw rocks at LAPD, but if you look at them, they have a ton of sworn people doing jobs that we have professional staff doing. And that was an effort we made some 10, 11, 12 years ago to really be as effective as we can and use professional staff instead of sworn staff and keep our sworn staffing level on the street where it belongs. So we ought not go there. And then finally, just general budget capacity, and I mentioned this before, our capital budget is essentially gone. We are replacing some vehicles that need to be replaced purely out of safety reasons, but everything else has been suspended or eliminated. Our M&O is severely underfunded. We have had exorbitant increases in a variety of areas that are beyond our discretionary ability to manage it, and there's just no capacity there. And we've talked to you repeatedly about the efforts we've made to restrict our overtime. And that in all reality, when we look at discretionary overtime, it's very, very minimal. It's about $1 million in total. And even though our overtime budget is much more than that, so much of it is non-discretionary. So we just don't have a lot of wiggle room in these areas to fix the problem. So having said that and set the stage, here's what we recommend. And it's an area command concept. It's something we haven't done. It's something that we've wanted to do as a result of our strategic plan, but it was something we thought we'd do incrementally over time with adequate resourcing. We simply are not in that position to do so. So we're recommending that we break the paradigm and we jump in and we implement it now at this point in time. And what this means is essentially that the area command, what our watch commanders do now is they command a shift-based system. They're responsible for a certain time period of the day where they put the policing resources out on the street and respond to calls for service. What we are recommending is that we modify that and enlarge and expand that role where they actually assume ownership for a defined geographic area in the city. And they'll own it. They're going to be responsible for it. And as such, they will, in essence, serve as kind of a mini chief of police for that district. And they will be expected to be the single point of contact, to be the go-to person for issues of public safety, crime, traffic, whatever the issue may be, to be engaged and involved with the community in that regard, and in essence, take ownership and responsibility for that area. But two important things have to occur to allow that to happen. Number one is we have to greatly enhance our crime analysis capability and management information systems. And we simply have to make that not to where you're getting reports on a monthly basis, but where a watch commander will have a steady flow of meaningful information on a day-to-day basis. So when they come to work, they will know exactly what has happened in their community, in their neighborhoods, and what they need to do to address those issues. And so we are putting in place now strategies to enhance that. A lot of it is dependent on grant funding, which we've secured, but that simply has to happen. Second to that is that we still have a watch-based system that we have to operate. So what we are envisioning doing is taking a senior sergeant responsible for that watch, expanding their job responsibility and role, and is in essence making a watch sergeant responsible to a much greater extent of running that time and shift based operation, still under the authority and command of the lieutenant, but with much more responsibility. And those two moves will do a couple of important things. One, hopefully it'll start preparing sergeants to be lieutenants, and the lieutenants in an area command will hopefully start to prepare and expand their horizons to where they're going to be better prepared to become captains. And career development and succession planning will be accomplished better in our organization. But more importantly than that, given our limited resources, hopefully it'll allow us to, with much greater effectiveness, put our resources directly where the problems and issues are. And how we've traditionally done policing, and it's not a bad way, if you're well staffed in a police department, the scattergun approach works very well, and that means between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. you're going to take your 25 police officers and you're going to scatter them out in the community, and just by sheer presence you're bound to hit something. And even if you don't, you're going to have a pretty effective deterrence in terms of your presence and a pretty respectable response time to incidents that occur. And that's a wonderful thing. That deters and prevents crime in a community. But however, if you don't have that staffing, then you've got to go to a different tactic. And this tactic with area command is less the scattergun approach and more the sniper rifle approach. If I could use a firearms analogy, since we were talking about the range quite a bit, I'll use that. And that is that patrol commanders are going to be expected to get good information on problems and issues and direct resources in a much more accurate and surgical way, and that they're going to be held accountable and responsible for doing that. And so by using this approach, we feel that even though we can still reduce the cops unit by 3 officers, take the remaining 5 and assign them to the area lieutenants. And yes, we're cutting back on cops officers. We're recommending a reduction of 3. But strategically, we're kind of gaining 4 lieutenants into the concept, and so we think that it will work. And in doing so, we'll bring the patrol officers, the district officers, more in line and more involved with that community, problem-oriented type of policing approach under the direction of these watch commanders. So this is probably the most significant component that we bring before you with this option, and that in doing so, we're going to be able to save about $500,000 with this reduction. So that's phase 1. Phase 2 involves our downtown policing unit, and as you know, with the creation of the Americana brand and the enhancement of our downtown area, we've given it a lot of attention and resources in terms of staffing a downtown policing unit solely focused and assigned to those areas. And currently the staffing is 8 officers working under the direction of a sergeant. What we're recommending here is that in order to save the vice unit, that we instead reduce 2 officers from the downtown policing unit. And there'll be some negative impact in that certainly there'll be less of a police presence in a proactive way. But nonetheless, we still feel there'll be adequate resources there to respond to issues, and certainly we have patrol support in the immediate area. So we don't think we'll lose a whole lot, especially if we draw this area into the area command philosophy as well. And this area will be assigned a lieutenant. That lieutenant will have access to a wide variety of resources outside of specifically the downtown policing unit to solve and address issues in this area. So this will be brought into our area command concept, and in essence become the fifth area. In addition, what we are really interested in pursuing here in the downtown area is a public safety business improvement district. And we have generated, I think, significant partnerships and support and relationships with the downtown business community. I think there's room there to work together to a much greater extent to meet the public safety concerns in that area in a much more collaborative way. And so this was another issue that came up in our strategic plan, a concept that we needed to follow through with. And so now is a good time to start exploring that area. This restructuring will save a little over $300,000 in terms of this reorganization. And finally, the final component of this option is with our high school SROs. And as you know, we've traditionally had 2 SROs assigned physically on the Hoover campus and 2 on the Glendale campus. Of those 4 positions, 1 was grant funded. It allowed us to actually go into a 4-officer unit there. And they worked under the direction of a sergeant. Unfortunately, the grant funding has dwindled away. And as a result, we have been left without the funding for one of those positions. And recently, because of that, we've had to eliminate that position. We just didn't have the capacity to absorb it in the general fund, obviously. So just within the last month, that position has come off the books here in the summertime, and when we reconvene with the fall semester, we're only going to have 3 SROs available to put back on the campus. So our thought is this: it would be a better idea to take those 3 remaining SROs and rather than physically putting them on a campus, to put them in a patrol car, put them under the direction of the area commanders who are going to be responsible for the schools in their areas in a very intimate way, and allow them to be deployed on a mobile basis to spend time on the campuses, to respond to planned events or other issues or emergency responses, and make that their sole area of assignment, not just the high schools, but all the GUSD campuses, and hopefully take the minimal resources and stretch them as best we can. And so doing that will allow us the opportunity to take the school resource officer sergeant that was overseeing a very robust program just a couple years ago with 4 high school SROs and 3 middle school SROs, and to take that sergeant and eliminate it from our ranks. And that saves us, as you see, over $200,000. So collectively, we reduce cops by 3 officers, but we pick up 4 watch commanders in the concept. We reduce a downtown policing unit by 2 officers, but we involve it in the area command as well, and explore the possibility of a bid. And we eliminate the SRO sergeant and field base those resources with a specific district of assignment being the Glendale schools. And doing so saves that $1 million. And allows us to still retain the function of cops, but more specifically not touch Vice, STAR, PAL, and the Explorer program, as we heard your direction before. Now, having said that, I don't want to say that this is the panacea and all that, and everything's going to be well, because there are definite consequences to this. We are, in essence, still eliminating, with this option alone, 6 sworn officers, 6 sworn positions, and that's in addition to the 2 already accepted with the reorganization of our front desk. So what does that mean? That means there'll be less cops, officers, physically in the neighborhoods, but we'll use a different strategy, hopefully, to still address the needs. It means there'll be less officers assigned in the downtown policing area, but we'll have a lieutenant more directly involved in overseeing those issues and engaging the community, that specific community, and less officer presence on high school campuses, but just a little different model of providing those services. So the area command restructuring is a strategy that we think we can use to lessen the impact of these consequences and maximize the remaining resources we have left. And hopefully it'll provide the structure and foundation to continue this into the future when times are healthier and we can get back on track to growing the department to meet the needs of the community. We'll have kind of a different paradigm, a different service model that will be very effective. So having presented that is option 1. And we'd love to hear your questions or feedback related to that.
Mr. Weaver.
Of the other police forces in Southern California, what paradigm are they on? Are any doing the way you're suggesting?
There are. However, they're the minority. The majority of police officers in the Southern California area run the traditional model that we've always run, and that's basically a time and shift based model with special units of assignments to address specific areas. There are a small minority that are doing area commands, and there's mixed reports. Some have been very successful, and some have reported problems with it.
It sounds to me that in this system, the area commanders will have more knowledge of what's happening in their sector than under the current system.
Absolutely,
So
unequivocally.
they can strategically respond to things faster because they know where the problems are in a smaller area than across the whole city. Is that
Exactly the concept.
so? A big positive.
Yes.
So even if in the future, no, not if, when our budget is robust, if we add officers in, they'll go into this new paradigm and give you even better response in those areas.
Absolutely. We view it as a way to keep the lid on a boiling pot right now, but with adequate resourcing, we'll cook gourmet meals. in terms of what we do out there.
You're
in the
really
community.
these kind of
It's just a matter of resourcing. But yes, we think it's a good strategy. We think it's the right strategy for this community.
Mr. Starbird.
Your written report, Chief, touches on the need in this new structure of better utilizing crime analysis information. Can you touch on that a bit?
Yes. We have a crime analysis unit currently staffed with three professional staff. And right now they're very involved in producing our reports to the Department of Justice in terms of our crime rate and incidents of crime. They also provide management information on a monthly basis related to crimes, crime rates, traffic, calls for service, response times, all very, very valuable and useful stuff, but it's for the month prior, and it doesn't do us much good in terms of real time. And so what we need to do is to be able to take this unit and provide it with the technology, the software, the training, the capability of providing us with real-time, on-demand reports that are much more meaningful. It doesn't, if I'm a watch commander, an area commander, it's mildly interesting what happened last month. What's critically important to me is what happened in the last 12 hours. And I need to know that. And we're not capable of providing that right now. And a lot of it is just trying to get over technology and software hurdles. And we have grant funding. In fact, we just purchased software that once implemented, we think will get us there. But there's much more enhancements that can be done. I would envision in the department having what we call a war room, where any commander could walk in and have a variety of screens that tells them where the units are, where the calls for service are, what happened in terms of all the various crimes in the last 12 hours, district by district, where you could literally walk in and have this information immediately at the start of your shift, and then be able to put a game plan together to address those needs for your tour of duty. And I think we can get there. I really do. So that is our biggest task at hand, is a technology and software hurdle that's imminent.
Ms. Friedman.
Well, first, I want to thank you for your presentation and for coming up with such an innovative plan on such short notice, although it sounds like you've been thinking about this for a while, which I take a lot of comfort in. I have just a couple questions. First, the SROs, are they going to be on campuses enough to build relationships with the students? Not to the same level of presence that we've experienced up until this point in time. Yes, they will, but their sole area of responsibility will still be the school. So the way I envision it is that you'd have two SROs in a patrol car, and they'd start their morning. They may go to Glendale High and spend 3 or 4 hours there and be on campus, and then in the afternoon they may drive to Hoover High and spend their 3 or 4 hours on campus there. If there's a planned event at a school or an issue that we're dealing with, or a traffic problem, then they may carve time out of their day to be there. But it would, rather than just being present, it's going to be a very structured, planned day of activities. So the students will know when they're going to be there. Okay.
Well, they may not know specifically when they'll be there. It could be set up on a very specified schedule, but I think it's probably better to allow the discretion to the officers to go where they feel they need to be.
Right. Okay. Now, the large merchants downtown, like the Galleria and the Americana, they have their own private security.
Yes, they do.
So do you anticipate that they might step up their own security efforts, or that somehow those private officers could fill in some of the gaps?
I think that is certainly an option. However, I think both entities have robust security details now that work very closely with our officers. We have a good working relationship with them. And I think the elimination of 2 officers under this area command reorganization will not really have a very significant effect in terms of crime and police presence. We may be a little less proactive, but we'll certainly be able to take care of the problems.
And last question, did you look into some privatization of PAL and STARS, or any of those programs? We are exploring those options, especially with the administration of the programs, and we're in dialogue with, of course, Parks and Recreation and such about the administration of the programs and potential cost savings. I will say, though, that the true value of PAL and STAR and the Explorers is a direct mentorship relationship they have with police officers. And so there's no way to completely take the sworn officer out of the equation. It just would not work.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I'm not suggesting that you do that. Just if there are functions that could be done by private individuals outside of the police department to free up the officers to really spend the quality time with the clients.
I think that can be done. And again, just as a reminder, there is CDBG support for both STAR and PAL that provides hourly employees hired with those grant funds to do a lot of the administrative work already. And so what we're exploring is that can that be done to a greater level, and then just have the officers kind of make their cameo appearances at the events and still make it work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chief, I have a couple of quick questions. How many areas do you envision? How's the city?
There would
gonna
be 5. The
how
major
would it be broken up geographically?
Right. The major city we would divide into quadrants, so 4 major areas, and the 5th area would be specifically the downtown central business district, to include the Galleria and Americana, Exchange Marketplace, the Brand Corridor, and such. So that'll be carved out within this 4-area structure.
And then the street officers, right up into the sergeants, et cetera, but especially the street officers, they will always be in this area, meaning they're not going to be moved monthly from one area to the other, or even quarterly. They're going to stay in their region, so to speak.
Yes, in Tuaga, the community policing officers will be assigned to their area commanders, and they will own an area, the same area that lieutenant owns, and that will not deviate. They will own it 24/7, 365 a year. The patrol officers, what we really need to do, and this is tough to do given our limited patrol staffing, but the officers that work the district cars, what we're going to try to do is create as much consistency as possible in terms of the districts they're assigned to. So if they're working a La Crescenta car or a downtown West Side car, we want them to be doing that consistently. So they start working with the area commander and the cops officer on a very regular basis. So when that cops officer and lieutenant go home at the end of the day, and now it's 2 a.m, that patrol officer is still aware of the issues and problems and can do whatever they can do to continue working on those issues when they're not responding to calls for service.
And then how do you mesh the traffic enforcement? How do the motors work within this?
Well, in a perfect world, you would area base all your resources. So every area would have, in essence, assigned resources, and we're certainly not capable of doing that. So traffic function will still be a centralized function, as will be investigations and vice narcotics. However, those are going to be resources available to the area commander. So, and this is something we're going to have to work out. It's going to take a lot of cooperation, and it's going to be difficult, undoubtedly. But when an area commander has a traffic issue, they're going to have to work with the traffic bureau commander to allocate resources to help them on that. And so there's going to have to be a lot of sharing of resources and some careful prioritizing of issues in order to accomplish that.
And so in terms of your command staff, in the past you had a captain assigned to all the different divisions, and so now they'll actually be placed in a regional type of...
at the lieutenant's rank. And what we're focusing on is the lieutenants that are currently assigned as patrol watch commanders. So it's those lieutenants that are now overseeing a time and shift-based function that they will broaden their area responsibility and pick up an area of assignment. So it is definitely a job enlargement for these lieutenants. And it may drive some reorganization all the way up to the captain's level in terms of the overall organization. We haven't completely worked through that yet, but we have some ideas of how we'll get there. But everybody, what this is, it's a shift in philosophy, and that means it has to be embraced from the chief's office all the way down.
And when you talk about other departments that have done it, do any come to mind that you know of? I mean, is it Long Beach or LAPD or, San Jose? Do you have
Sure. LAPD has, in some areas, moved into this arrangement and done so very, very successfully. You've heard the media reports on their progress in the Harvard study related to things that they have done very well under Chief Bratton. So not the entire organization, but certain divisions have implemented it successfully. The city of Pasadena has operated this system for some time, and my discussions with the chief and command staff is that although there are some pitfalls with it, they like it. They feel it makes management very accountable to the community, and the community knows the department, not just the cops officer and the chief, but knows who the real operational people are. And the community likes it, and it's been successful there. And there's a handful of others sprinkled out throughout the Southern California area, and the reviews are mixed. They are mixed. It's not a panacea. It takes a lot of work, a lot of cooperation, a lot of commitment to the philosophy. Because if you don't commit philosophically to doing this, then it's bound to fail.
Mr. Weaver?
Another question following up on Laura's comment. I've always believed the SROs have more impact in middle schools before the kids formulate their own way of doing things. We have them in the 2 high schools. With this reorganization, will they cover more than just the high schools? Will they, on patrol, be able to hit into the middle schools also?
Yes, absolutely. We would, and the high school SROs had really a different mission and purpose than middle school. Middle school is definitely a mentorship, early intervention type of strategy, where the high school was really a public safety resource there, and we were concerned about violence on the schools. We had certain acts of violence, and having cops on campus there helped to prevent and respond to those situations. So we envision this, that they're still going to be very much responsible for ensuring public safety on the high school campuses and addressing those issues. But part of their district of assignment will be the middle schools as well. So if there's a special event at a middle school, let's say, our SROs could show up, be there in uniform, present, interacting with the kids, and be a resource there that currently we do not have.
Chief, how are you going to, in terms of the city, the 4 quadrants, are you going to base it on geographical area or population density? What sort of thoughts do you have on?
It'll definitely be geographically based, but what we're going to have to take into consideration is population and existing workloads, what the call for service load is for a given area. So it may be that one commander's actual physical area may be smaller than someone else's. For instance, downtown west or our downtown area west side is a very busy, active area. And so we may need to make that smaller, and one of the area commanders, maybe we combine more of the canyon areas and La Crescenta into a larger geographic area, but the call for service load and some of the other workload demands are less. So we're going to have to find a way to do that, and to do so based on a good analysis.
I could see how, I know to a large extent our fire stations are based on response time, and they're located somewhat centrally to their districts. So in terms of police, if you did it if that was your only criteria, you may be able to get to the location of an incident quickly, but you may just have a huge number of residents being served by one or two officers. So
Yeah, and you bring up a very, very good point. And let me reiterate that the shift-based patrol, the patrol watches that puts officers out in districts throughout the city will not change. That will not change. Our patrol staffing will still field the same number of 911 responders. They will still be strategically assigned throughout the city. It will not affect our response times. It will not detract from that patrol force one bit. The only thing it'll do is it'll take that lieutenant that oversees that system and give them a greater responsibility to include an area and solving problems in an area.
the other thing is I'm very concerned about losing an SRO officer, because I think once you fall below that critical mass, I think Councilmember Friedman was sort of alluding to that. Once you lose that critical mass of a continuous presence, the bond and the advantages of having the SRO on campus they diminish dramatically. How many youth are directly served by the PAL and the STAR program?
The PAL and STAR are actually they're rather small programs. Our STAR program probably deals with 20 to 30 kids annually. Now, granted, those are identified as kids that really need intervention, and there's been some wonderful things done there, but it is a small population base with STAR. We can only accommodate so many kids. With PAL, there's two main components of that, and that's our boxing program and our equestrian program. The equestrian program is focused more on girls, and that program is small too, maybe a dozen kids. Boxing is probably a little larger, maybe 20, 30 boys involved in that program. But these programs, while they do great things and certainly intervene in some important areas, they're small populations.
So I'm thinking, as a replacement to the STAR and the PAL programs, keeping that extra SRO, maybe not at the level of sergeant, but at the level of patrol or officer, because I think someone on, let's say, the Glendale High campus is going to have a much, in terms of number of students that he sees and would be able to interact with, much higher than the PAL and STAR. And as far as our boxing goes, would it not be better if we obtain scholarships to these youth who want to be involved in boxing programs, to the numerous, they've sprung up quite a few lately, fight clubs or martial arts clubs or boxing clubs, and in a sense privatize that. Same with equestrian. I'm sure that there's plenty of horse riding lessons at the stables that for a lesser amount, if it's 20 kids, 15 kids, subsidize or get some sort of donation from those vendors, from the service providers. City kick in a little bit, but try and preserve an SRO. I think an SRO is going to serve more. Let's put it this way: I think the loss of our fourth SRO in the high schools is going to diminish to a much greater extent our ability to interact than maintaining the PAL and the STAR program, just in terms of numbers.
And I agree with you. Again, the only problem with completely privatizing these functions is you take the police officer out of the mentorship role. So yes, we run a boxing club program, but their real value is they interact daily with the police officer. That becomes a very important mentor in their relationship, and so that is kind of the behind-the-scenes value aside from just the service. So that would be something you would have to weigh in terms of what you want. But I will not disagree with you. If we could keep 2 high school officers on each high school campus, that's a wonderful thing. However, we don't have that 4th officer anymore. It's gone. and nobody's paying for it.
Have we asked the schools to contribute to backfill?
Yes,
And I presume we did not get a affirmative response.
you've presumed correctly.
Well, my feeling on, trading the SRO for the PAL, number one, as you mentioned, the total cost to the police is what is it, 56,000? I mean, it's a very small amount.
It's a small
because of
amount,
the funding we get from community development, which in fact could be beefed up. But in a sense, since these are the most at risk, the ones that are more likely to get involved in issues as they go forward through their high school time, a kind of sort of hit or miss on the campus doesn't do the kind of focused attention that these programs do. I mean, I am very much into keeping these programs. Now, to bring in volunteers, absolutely, if we can get more people involved with the programs, I think that's been one of the issues, that we haven't done enough of that. The guy that organized the boxing at the Civic, as you know, said he'd donate equipment, etc. The equestrian, maybe we can beef it up more. But to me, the idea there would be to enroll more kids, to make it more able to serve a larger amount of kids. But there has to be the police interaction, not only with the kids, but also with the families. It's more than just the kids. It's with the families, with the brothers and sisters that are part of the family. And I know the kind of work that this program's done throughout the years, and it's more than just the sort of numbers involved. It's also about the interaction. That's why you have successive family members that get involved in these programs. Mr. Draymond.
Just a couple of questions.
Sure.
Public safety BID. How do we plan to organize that?
I'm not sure,
Okay.
but it's something that we will
No, I
explore.
appreciate the honest answer, believe me. Reduce the COPS program by 3. So are we saying we are laying off those officers?
Currently, we have 2 vacancies. If this option is accepted, it will result in the reduction of 8 sworn positions. We anticipate some additional vacancies in the near future related to job-related injury retirements. So we might have, hopefully, by the end of summer, maybe September or so, up to 5 vacancies that would cover 5 of those positions. The other 3, we would either have to lay off or take the time to attrition them out and use some other kind of salary savings against that.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because on one of the slides we were talking about, you were saying we would still be, I forget the exact word you used, Chief, but in essence eliminating 6
Yes,
sworn
that is correct.
officers.
That is correct.
When we say eliminating 6 sworn officers, I think it's important for the public to understand, not just here, but watching or reading about it later. Are we talking about the laying off of 6 sworn police officers?
It would, at the way we see it now, would probably be the need to lay off 3 positions, and 5 positions would be eliminated through our 5 vacancies. 2 currently, and 3 anticipated by September.
All right. By the way, we're talking about the area commanders, and I think your words were that the area commanders will be involved in the schools, and I assume we mean middle schools and high schools, in an intimate way.
Yes.
What do you mean?
That means that they are going to be responsible for the public safety issues, the crime issues, the traffic issues, the neighborhood interface issues of those schools assigned in their district. It is part of their district. They own it. We'll use good information to ensure accountability to those areas and problems. And That's what it equates to, is responsibility and accountability for all those entities within that area commander's district.
But it doesn't. But what it really relates to is boils down to, in terms of our SROs, is less contact with the students.
Certainly, absolutely.
Have we talked to the school district about this idea?
No, I have not.
Do we plan to do that?
Absolutely, we will. We have had dialogue with the school district over the years about SRO coverage, the lack of funding for this fourth position, and our desire to move towards a more of an area-based, community-based deployment related to the schools.
And then in terms of overall cost savings that you refer to, assuming all of this went the way you've laid it out, when would the city actually see those cost savings?
Well, I think the majority of them are going to be pretty immediate. Of course, a lot of the strategies we already shared with you, the reduction of overtime and the reduction of some of the other services, will be immediate. The one thing that will be delayed will be accomplishing the elimination of a total of 8 sworn positions. If we are allowed a few months to attrition a few of those out based on pending vacancies that we know will be happening, then there'll be a little delay time going into that. However, we've been very fiscally responsible in the management of this organization, so much so that our last budget, we're turning back $1 million worth of savings. And we will continue to do whatever we need to do to ensure we meet our financial obligation of this 5%.
Let me ask another question that comes to mind. Tell me again what the price tag is on that fourth SRO.
In total, it's about 160.
Yes.
I just took the the savings on the existing SRO program that noted 3 filled and divided it by 3, and it came up to about $172,000 per position, as opposed to the sergeant, which is the supervisor position, being in the neighborhood of $215,000.
And the total price tag on the sort of social outreach programs, in other words, PAL, STAR, all of that.
Those are $115,000 if you add them up.
Well, $115,000.
$115,500.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Tarburn.
Mr. Mayor, in fairness to the school district, Mr. Najarian asked about the grant position. I have to say that I wasn't completely aware of the fact that the grant funding that had been referenced was with respect to a current SRO. I was under the misconception that related to a position that had been eliminated some time ago. I only last week made Dr. Escalante aware of the situation with the grant funding and the fourth position, and asked him to check with his staff to make sure that we both understand that having happened the way it has, and we're both on the same page. And that was literally just middle of last week, so he has I think, in his own staff probably getting up to speed on the implications of that fourth position. Mr. Draymond was in the most recent meeting with GUSD that we have every other month. And I noted that the high school SROs were 3. They were under the impression, gee, no, they're 4. And that's what started us down this road of trying to figure out, okay, why are we listing 3 and yet they were under the impression there's 4? And that's when it dawned on me that this grant position and backbilling situation we had was really related to an active SRO position. So in fairness to them, we really haven't talked either about this structure because it's only been developed in the past, at least put on paper in the past week. And the school district is still, I think, researching from their standpoint the situation with the fourth position that was grant funded.
Well, I'll say this. One, I do like the idea of the area commander and so forth. I just think that is going to be an effective way to police this city, and especially if the black and whites, if those street officers are consistently in the same neighborhoods. There is no substitute for someone who's been doing this for weeks and for months and maybe even eventually years. They really get to know that neighborhood. They obviously know cars and apartments and residents and everything else. So I think there's going to be a lot of focus on something going wrong. They'll be able to drive down a street more or less and say, well, wait a minute, that looks a bit out of position, so to speak. So I like that idea. And as the money begins to trickle back into the city's coffers, I think we can actually add more police officers and be even more effective. I'm not particularly worried about the downtown. I think between the private security guards and the Glendale Police Department, I think the downtown should be okay. I don't think we have to worry about that. I mean, there's less and less people. Friday night I was at a dinner in a restaurant downtown, and I think I counted 4 tables occupied. This restaurant is normally super busy. So anyway, I think we'll be all right there. So, I mean, I think you did a good job, Chief. I like the plan overall, and hopefully we can go for that extra SRO. I certainly wouldn't have any problem with that if we can somehow find the funds through the grants or some other way. But I think it's the best we can do under the circumstance. Mr. Weaver.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with the mayor too. These are tough times, and this is probably going to be about as lean as you can get in your department. So it can only be more people in the future. We all told you to go back and come back with a different way, doing it to save the programs, and you have done that. I don't know what more we can expect out of you. That's not you. It's the captains, too, and the rest of the staff that participated. So I have to admit to a degree, I'm surprised to some degree that you did find a way. I like this command system. I think it will be better. But it's like anything else. There's going to be pluses and minuses. It's going to take time. You're going to learn from the experiences. As a council, we just have to commit to staying with you and seeing you through. So I'm fine with it.
Okay, we're going to go to the public. Start with Mike Mohill, followed by Herbert Milano.
Would somebody get Mr. Mohill in?
Right outside the door.
We're standing outside
They're
talking.
having a conference back there.
Mr. Milano out there, too?
What is colleagues that you're looking for?
Colleagues, yeah.
Colleagues.
Mike Mohill, followed by Herbert Milano.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. My name is Mike Mohill, retired. I support the police department in their effort on the planned 6% salary increase due in July. The police have the most dangerous job in the city. The rank and file carries a firearm whenever they go on duty, i.e. traffic enforcement, domestic violence, or any other calling. No police call is the same and rarely know what to expect. Their life is on the line 24/7, and they are willing to do their job knowing the risk at hand. Who on the council will volunteer for this job? The other safety personnel are the fire department, who are very well paid and go into a situation knowing what to expect. And most of all, they do not have to carry a firearm on duty. Recently, the fire department union said they would give up their COLA. 130,000 hours of overtime for the fire department has been recorded by the city's own documentation last year. Will the fire department add more overtime to make up for their loss in salary? Former council candidate and critic Bruce Philpott came before the council many times last year challenging the way the fire department was run, with excess overtime, and they challenged the fire department how it was run. Several councilmen at the time dismissed Philpott's criticism of the department. Will this new council take a second look into the management of the fire department as the city faces a financial meltdown? But we also have executive managers making over $100,000 and some over $200,000 per year with benefits who sit behind a desk without any concern for either life, property, or safety. I believe the City Council has their priorities all wrong. These executives get free membership at a health club, continue education for classes that they may or may not be related to their job performance, have a city executive insurance policy in which they pay no copay. In addition, with a generous salary and benefit package, where are these executives able to claim a car allowance? If the City Council eliminates these executive perks, brought in an independent auditor for the fire department, how much money could the city save and pass that savings onto the rank and file in the police department? The city is famous for hiring outside consultants. Perhaps it is now time to bring in an independent auditor to see what the city can save additional monies. For what I've been reading, there are too many foxes in the henhouse. Thank you. Mike Mohill, retired.
Retired Admiral or Herbert Milano,
Doesn't have any feathers.
followed by Bob Getz.
Good morning, Mayor Quintero, members of the City Council, and city staff. My name is Herbert Molano. In 2001, Mayor Quintero, when you were elected to office, I think that you came in with an outside-in perspective concerning governance. One of the first things you did, if I recall, and you promoted, was the move to have the City Council sessions at 6 p.m. as opposed to 2 o'clock in the afternoons. And if I recall correctly, you also moved to have employees show up on Fridays, which was a significant benefit to the residents of Glendale. Mr. Weaver has a similar history initially when he came into office. I understand from other councilmen and prior mayors that he was very active in ensuring that there will be, a higher level of responsiveness from city departments. And so he came in with an outside-in perspective. But things have changed. We now have, I think, a process which is an inside-out perspective with regard to governance. Let me give you an example. In November of last year, we have a report from the Glendale Water and Power that showed that 20,000 residents are having difficulty meeting their electrical utility. And yet that report and the need to basically take that into account with regard to our city's needs and finances was not really developed much further than that particular presentation. But yet last week, you approved additional medical costs that the city would incur, an additional $500,000, for individuals who generally don't have any copay. So I think that the individuals with the highest salary are the individuals who are actually not providing their particular contribution to the copay, which is the whole idea behind reducing our medical costs. So it's an inside-out mentality that I see and I'm experiencing here. The major trends that I've seen for the past 10 years has been a reduction in the capital improvement, money being taken from CIP into the general fund. In 2004, we had 50% of the sales tax applied towards CIP. It's now only 4%. Again, the salaries, the pensions, and the benefits go first, and whatever is left over is then addressed to the public. So now we have a significant number of people, over 10% without a job, going into the libraries to look for some free time of internet access. But now those particular hours are cut, and the individuals in need of looking for a job basically have the city's resources being cut. So we, I think, need a performance-based approach to a strategic plan. So we can say not how many employees you assign here or how many employees you assign here, but what are the objectives by which you will decide how the budget is structured. And I think that if you do that, it will make the whole conversation that you had this morning much easier. What were the objectives of the SRO and how do you measure performance? And then how many people do you need and where? And I think a similar approach, by looking at a performance-based strategic objective and looking from the outside in, will allow you to create a fairer budget. Thank you very much.
Okay, Bob Getz.
Good morning, Mayor Quintero, members of council, staff. I'm Bob Getz, a resident of Northwest Glendale. I wanted to come here today to this study session to let you know that there are people out here who do in fact support the idea that the police department should participate in these further budget cuts. Now, I think that the chief should be commended for coming in here with some imaginative options, and I personally, as a member of the public, thank him for that. In listening to his proposal, I must admit that I shudder a bit when I hear that we're eliminating, actually cutting police officers from the role. And I say that because we have such a difficult and an expensive time recruiting, training, and acclimating to our community these police officers. And I just hate to think that 4 or 5 years from now, we'll be in a different economic situation and we'll find ourselves scouring the landscape for trained, talented people to work on our police force. Now, I keep asking the question, aren't there ways that we can reduce costs without cutting people, valuable people? I know that an organization where 3/4 of our costs are related to employment and people, that it's difficult to avoid. But there are some options out there where you can cut costs and save jobs and save programs and not eliminate city services. And one of those that we all are familiar with, but I haven't heard much discussed, are these things called work furloughs. Work furloughs, to those people who aren't familiar, would require all employees in the city to give up 1 or 2 days of paid employment. They get 1 or 2 days of unpaid leave. That system is designed to spread the impact of these cost-cutting measures across the entire spectrum. It affects everybody. It, by its very nature, is designed to avoid permanent layoffs. And in doing that, you can save programs and you don't have to shut down programs. I would certainly hope that that option would be given consideration. Now, maybe it's something that is not permissible under the current contract with our employee unions. And if that's the case, I would hope that you could send the signal to the employee unions that we've got to explore that either in a renegotiation or come back next time with this issue right at the top of your negotiations issues list. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. That's the final card. Mr. Milano, in case anyone is listening this morning and is unemployed, the place to go is a job center where they can register online and get the receive the counseling and in fact do all of their searches, send their resumes online. So they're not charged anything at the Verdugo Job Center, which is on South Central Avenue in the city of Glendale. Okay, that's it from the public. Any comments?
Move to adjourn?
No.
Well, before you adjourn, we'd like further comments and direction. You have the budget before you this evening for adoption. It doesn't have this proposal from the police department specifically within it, but it does anticipate a 5% reduction in the police budget, and something different than that would mean we'd need to rely on one of the 3 strategies we spelled out at the last meeting for closing the gap. At this point, with the programs presented by the chief, they're actually a little bit beyond the cost of the 6 programs that you had expressed an interest in restoring by about $40,000.
Ms. Friedman.
Just a few comments. First, for Mr. Getz, we have been talking about furloughs, voluntary and involuntary, in the budget session. So it is something that the City Council, there's no decisions made, but it's something that we've been looking at. I have a question about something that Mr. Milano brought up, and I think it's a question for the Chief, which is, do we have any way of knowing the impact that some of these programs like STAR and PALS and the SROs have had? And I think that one of the things that I'm curious in terms of when you have your conversations with the school board is their perspective on the SROs, if they feel that they're badly needed, would be nice to have but not essential, kind of their sense. But do we have, I know we don't have sort of performance measures that are on paper, because how do you quantify something where you might not see the result for 10 years or 20 years? But do you have a sense of how these programs are working?
Yes, in response to your first question about the impact that programs such as PAL and STAR has, obviously it's near impossible to quantify, but what we do have are some anecdotal stories that are extremely illustrative of the positive effect that these programs can have in terms of intervening in young lives. Obviously, a lot of our kids involved in these programs have older siblings that are involved in gangs and gang activity, and we know for certainty that but for these programs, they would have gone down that same path. There's no doubt. Now we see kids that have gone through STAR, for example, that have not only avoided getting involved with gangs and drugs and the criminal life, but have proceeded to do very well in school, to come back and serve as mentors actually in the program, and some to even go on and achieve careers in law enforcement. So anecdotally, we can bring to you all kinds of stories that are illustrative of wonderful things that the program has done. However, again, it's on a small level with a small population.
Adding to that, having again just had a meeting with the school district that Mr. Draymond was involved in with me, I think they would tell you that they value the SRO programs quite highly. I think if they had to do over again, they would have probably made a louder objection when the SROs in the middle schools were cut. I think you would hear very loudly from them in a negative way on a proposal in any way to reduce the level of SRO programs in the high schools. We did in that meeting agree that at some point, if they desired, we'd sit down and look at how the police might be able to better meet some of the need on the middle schools with the existing SRO program. But I think they would tell you quite loudly that the high school SRO programs are tremendously valuable to them.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. So with regards to the SROs, I do like that this plan will get them into the middle schools again, a little bit more.
Yes.
I agree, if there's a way we can find a way to keep the fourth person, it would be great, but I just don't know. I'm just going to make some comments, so if I have any more questions, thanks. None of us got elected to cut back on public safety. And this is, of all of the cuts that we've been talking about and all of the budget slashing, this has got to be the most difficult for everybody. But in a way, it's appropriate that we're here last, because I think that the other departments have really done an incredible job cutting as much as they can. And when we're looking at avoiding some of these cuts, we have to look at other areas, like cutting back on library hours, cutting back on parks. And all of that, you could argue, relates to public safety as well, because it provides recreation for people, it provides an outlet. So none of those are really good alternatives. The employees of the city, for the most part, are taking salary freezes and really doing their part. So I don't think that there's large piles of money that are lurking somewhere in the budget that you could get your hands on and no one would notice. I think at this point, anything that happens, any cut is going to hurt somewhere. I think that the chief and the department have done an amazing job coming back quickly and responding and coming up with ways to keep Glendale safe and still make the cuts that that we've asked them to make within their department. So, this is a really tough day for everybody. And I think that as soon as money does become available and as soon as the economy starts to recover, my guess is that this is the first place that we're going to look. Because, it really is in some ways the most essential and basic part of government. I do think that we should look at STARS and PAL in whatever we can do to bring some non-city employees into those programs, still keeping the police so that they're having that interaction with the kids. I think that is, I understand that that's very, very important. But I have a friend who runs this program in Los Angeles for Parks and Rec with the equestrian, and they don't have any police contact. And she's a tough, ranch woman, and I think that in some ways, she serves that same purpose in her own way. I mean, you can find people that are sort of special people who, if you can handle a 2,000-pound animal, you could handle, even a troubled teen. So we can find people like that and bring them in, I think, and there are places to save money and maybe even expand the experience for the kids. So I think we really should keep looking at that. Because if we can find some way of keeping the police there but lowering the cost, then we might be able to get that fourth officer. And I think that would be a good trade-off. Anyway, those are my comments.
Another thing I say, you find a way to keep the programs, but unfortunately I still have to feel the way I did before. Police get 6% salary increase, nobody else in the city gets 1%. I still think that sends the wrong message. They could have had 3%, and we could have saved those 8 positions that you're going to eliminate that are desperately needed. That's water under the bridge. It's not going to happen. So we lose 8 positions that are desperately needed in the police department. That's the bottom line. So,
before I go to Mr. Draymond, now the speaker, Mr. Getz, was concerned about actually officers being laid off after they've been trained and so forth. Is that going to happen?
Yes, it could potentially happen, Mr. Mayor, members of council. We have 2 vacancies currently that can absorb 2 positions. We have 3 anticipated. Hopefully, those cases will be resolved by the end of summer. But that still leaves us 3 positions short. So absent some kind of grace period to attrition those out, we'd have to proceed with layoffs.
Or retirements, correct? If some officers decide to retire, then...
Exactly, and that is, but there's nothing imminent, so that would require some time.
Mr. Draymond.
I'm going to limit my comments to the issue of the SROs and as they relate to the social outreach programs. One is approximately $160,000 a year. The other is about $115,000 a year. And I'm not very happy about the layoffs. I'd say that's an understatement. I mean, Ms. Friedman, you mentioned before that none of us are particularly interested in a reduction in public safety assets in the city, whether it's police, fire, anywhere else. It's just not, runs counter to everything that I understand about the needs in this city I grew up in and now have the opportunity to serve. But in any case, I don't know if this can be done, and I don't know how it can be done, but my preference at this point, and I'm open to hearing more debate on it, and quick, and I hope we will hear, relates to this issue of SROs. I don't think that, and I know what the chief means when he says be intimately involved in the schools, but I got to say that's a very different kind of contact than the core mission, if you will, of a student resource officer. That kind of mentoring that we talk about as a matter of fact, the exact kind of benefit that we talk about in the social outreach programs is what these SROs offer to our students, particularly in the middle schools. And the reason I ask whether we are discussing that issue in a broader sense with the school board is because they may have some very specific input, high schools versus middle schools, or both, or rotational, or something. But I would, and I'm not sure that's exactly where Councilmember Najarian was going, but I take from his point earlier that at least somewhere in his questioning was the concept that we should retain this fourth SRO and perhaps look at the elimination of these social outreach programs for now. Is that a good thing to do? Absolutely not. None of this is a good thing to do. But at some point, you have to try to figure out what priorities you have and who is going to be the largest population served. And so I'm not convinced that we need to cut the social outreach programs, but if I had to make a call between the two, I don't know how I can justify the one with all of its benefits. Mr. Quintero is a supporter of those programs, and rightly so, and his comments are absolutely sincere, and they're absolutely on point. This is one of those issues where the debate on both sides is absolutely sincere and absolutely on point. It's a matter of priorities. That's what we now have to discuss. I want to hear more input on that personally so that I can make a better decision. I am not happy at all about cutting the COPS program because there again it's a priority. I'm looking at that. I am extremely unhappy about that. I am very unhappy that we are looking at eliminating 3 officers in a program that is incredibly important to our citizens. And I don't just mean policing overall, I mean that program. As some of you know, I have fought very, very hard for that program over the years. And my father before me fought very, very hard to help bring that program in terms of public opinion. And to that end, I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Weaver's comments on that. It is extremely upsetting to be looking at that kind of reduction, with the potential of laying off 3 police officers out there on the streets doing this work. But that's where we are. Mr. Mayor, again, I just would like to hear some further debate before I have to make a vote.
Okay, well, I'll tell you this. What's the total budget? $56 million for the police?
56, 57 million, Jay? Yeah.
Right, 57 million. So I hate to get down to it's either SROs or it's PAL and STAR program. I'd like to, if we want to go with another SRO, let's get that money from somewhere in a $57 million budget, number one. Then number two, we have the Community Development Block Grant funding coming up. And hopefully we can allocate a larger percentage of those funds to help balance the STAR and PAL and the other program. Mr.
Just as you continue to talk about this, just some numbers I was pushing around here. An SRO is $172,000. The SRO sergeant supervisor was about $213,000. There's $41,000 there. That if you shifted the sergeant to an SRO, you save $41,000. The difference between the reductions the PD has put on the table and what was needed to preserve the 4 and the 2, the 6 programs you talked about before, is another $47,000. So you're about $90,000 just with those 2 things, getting toward the needed 175. We haven't had a conversation with the district about their view of this grant at this point. And granted, they are being hit as hard, if not harder, than we are in terms of dollars. But as Mr. Draymond and I heard from their board president and superintendent, the SRO program, especially at the high schools, is particularly valuable for them. I think we need to have that conversation with them. The gap I see to maintain an SRO is about $83,000. Given the 2 savings, and that means you keep the 6 programs, you reduce the sergeant to a police officer, about an $80,000 gap in that arena is yet unmet. You're right, that isn't a lot of money in a $58 million budget. At the same time, it does seem to me that at least we should have the conversation with the district about how they might be able to contribute to saving that position if you took these other actions.
Mr. Draymond.
Mr. Mayor, when you talk about a $57 million budget for a department, and you say that there must be somewhere else within that we can deal with this, I couldn't agree with you more. Having nothing to do with these programs. But also, Mr. City Manager, we're talking about that like we've come down to these short little strokes. We're also reducing the COPS program by 3 officers out on the streets.
I agree.
And that's not a small price tag, and that is not the short strokes. So, I just wanted to put that back out there again. So, anyway.
Mr. Najarian.
I'm very reluctant to drop down to 3 SROs. I could live with it when we remove them from the middle schools, because I've seen firsthand the abilities of the middle school administrators and counselors vis-a-vis the students. When you get to high school, it's a different story, though, and there are some serious things going on in our high schools. One of the schools had some serious drug sales going on, if I'm not mistaken, and some burglaries related to that drug sale and usage. And I would rather, and I think the advantage of having an SRO there is just in terms of I hate to use the overword cliche, the bang for your buck, but I just think the number of students that can be affected by an SRO and the number of crimes that can be intercepted, or at least getting a sense, the information that an SRO can get from the 3,000 students at one of our high schools is just invaluable towards crime prevention and towards turning some lives around in terms of counseling. I hate to start micromanaging, but in my view, I think the SROs are so critical that I would rather have, I would take a vice officer that's patrolling for gambling and prostitution and direct those resources to the schools where you're dealing with our youth who may be turning the corner to very serious crimes, and which crimes may lead to other property crimes as well as personal crimes against the person. So, I'm very, very reluctant to drop from 4 to 3. As far as the cops go, I'm not happy dropping the cops, but your program and your proposal, I think, at least realizes the importance of the cops and is trying to reallocate and make the community whole in a different way. And I'm willing to give a little bit of leeway, because we're the ones who told you to go back and not cut these other areas. But I'm very concerned about the SROs. I think they play an invaluable role, and that's my strong feeling on that subject.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to have the position. We have 4 high schools. We have a 5th, but we actually have 4 mainstream high schools, if you want to call them that: Hoover, Glendale, Daly, and Crescenta Valley. And I think we need one body in each of those high schools, along with the sort of attention that they're going to get under the area commanders. I just think that's a great idea. When the lieutenants are interacting with the principals and the deans and the sergeants and the same officers, I think that's going to really reinforce. But I do think one designated SRO for those 4 schools, I think, are a good idea. And obviously the area commander can take care of the overachieving high school up in, not that there's not issues there, that's been my experience, 4.0 GPAs, and then on the other hand they've got another life going on the side, so they're not above reproach either. But Ms. Friedman.
Yeah. Councilmember Draymond asked for more discussion, so give a little more discussion. In terms of the cops, I agree about its value. I've talked to the cops representative in my neighborhood. We had a community meeting because we had some problems in our area, so I know how important that is. But if I'm understanding you correctly about your vision for this sort of realigned department, we're still going to have that same experience as a resident. It's just that now it's going to be more integral to all of the police that are in the area. So it's more like the cop on a beat type approach, where instead of knowing that one person, we'll now know 5 or 6 because we see them every single week and they know us. So if I'm correct about that, then that makes me feel more comfortable. I'm assuming that officer that we've come to know will still stay in our area. You're not going to be mixing them all up, but they're going to be able to build on those relationships. So,
Councilmember Friedman, you're exactly right with the concept. That is exactly how the concept would work. And there will still be 5 community policing officers left assigned to area commanders that will be working in conjunction with the district patrol officers. So in essence, you get a team approach to a specific area, and hopefully we'll still be able to carry out that philosophy and have that kind of access and that single point of contact where neighborhoods know who their area commander is, and they know who their cops officer is, and hopefully they'll know who the district officers are that are working their area, and that is certainly where we want to be.
And those officers that are in those areas now, they're going to remain in those same areas?
Yes. The downside, which I share Councilman Draymond's concerns. This cutting any resources from this police department hurts me deeply, and it's very troubling. But having said that, we'll do the best we can with this new structure, but there will be less cops, officers out in the neighborhood. They'll be reduced by 3, and there will be a cost and consequences related to that. That's just the simple reality.
Mr. Draymond.
Well, I think it's ironic, actually, Chief and Councilmember Friedman, that when the COPS program was brought online, this exact line of commentary was exactly what was sold to the city at that time.
Right.
This will give the feel of the cop on the beat. Now, when we remove it, it'll give the feel of the cop on the beat. But it's a slightly different point that I was trying to make before. It's not, I am not happy about a reduction of the COPS program. Having said that, what bothers me more is a reduction of 3 sworn officers.
Right.
In other words, we're not taking these 3 guys and reassigning them somewhere else. They're not going to be out there working on the core mission of the department, as we've heard it defined so many times over these seven budget study sessions, plus all the budget study sessions from last year and so on. They're not being reassigned. They're gone.
Right. Correct.
Okay? So the debate isn't about the, and it's my lack of articulating my concern well enough a moment ago. But I am upset about the reduction to the COPS program, but the bigger issue is that we are pulling 3 police officers off the street okay, for now not to be seen again anyway.
That is correct.
And so the issue, COPS program, not COPS program, is a very different one than a reduction in our department of 3 sworn officers. And that's a different direction than the city has headed in in my adult life anyway. However, I think I've been the only one up here that hasn't complimented you, and I want to take this time to do that now. I did utter those words. You saw in the Glendale News Press. I did utter those words. Go back, shake the Etch-a-Sketch, come back and see what we have. You've done that. And it is because of the level of professionalism within our police department. Not just the officers out on the street, but also administratively. I'm not so worried that other, perhaps smaller or differently organized or cities have done this, and not, as you say, not without problem. I think we can do a good job with this, and this is a bold way to move, and I'm happy with that, and I have confidence in that. My concern is the interconnection between these 3 elements. The SRO, I don't think we can afford as a local society to do that. And at the same time, we're reducing the COPS program. We're eliminating 3, not the program, we're eliminating 3 sworn officers. Let me phrase it that way. The fact that I'm upset about it is probably just going to have to be that way, but can't help but voice my opinion on it. So,
thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Acting like a police chief to Pampa, do you think you have enough direction from us?
Yes, I do, and I really appreciate the honest feedback and to hear your thoughts, and we'll do the best we can to try to accomplish those directions.
And let me just say that you truly are acting like a permanent police chief. You've been with the city how many years?
32 years.
32 years.
Long time.
And I think this particular presentation, the thought that you and the other captains and obviously the rest of the rank and file put into these ideas, I think it just shows your understanding of what Glendale's all about, and it's a tribute to you and your command staff. So I appreciate it very much, and I think just like Mr. Draymond said, I think you guys will be able, and women, will be able to put this together, and we'll push forward. We're at hopefully the bottom of the cycle, and from here we can do nothing but go up. Mr. Starbuck.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'm hearing consensus around support for the Chief's recommendation on the COPS program and the area command structure. I'd like a little more specific direction relative to the SROs. I'm not sure I'm hearing a consensus as to what you'd want us to do. Do we keep the 4th position? What happens? Do we keep the 4, I'll call them the smaller programs? Do we not keep the smaller programs? I think there's still a lack of clarity on how those relate.
Friedman.
I think yes on the 4th SRO. I would like them to see them patrol in the middle schools as well. We can do that without stretching them too thin, whether it's regular hours so that students that might need counseling know when they're there. But getting them back in the middle schools, I think I heard that loud and clear from people with kids in middle schools. I think we need to do that. In terms of the smaller programs, I'm a little sorry we didn't get more options. I would have loved to hear from Parks and Rec what they think their cost would be to operate those programs with police interaction, but with them maybe taking over some of the management of it, whether that would be a cost savings. So I think that that's something we need to hear more information on before we can really make a decision. I don't feel like we've really had the options given to us.
Although if I can, I think you can direct us that that's a direction you'd like to go. I will tell you, on the whole, with police involvement, you may save some portion of that, but continuing the programs, even with recreation leaders, again, you're $115,000, so maybe you save a third of it. Maybe you save $30,000, $25,000, and we can make the assumptions we're going to transition these to recreation, but it's not going to solve your major problem here. Keeping the SRO will present us with a challenge, but I think we're at least half of the way there. And transitioning the programs is something that would be less costly. Maybe we're in the $15,000 to $30,000 range of savings. on that? I wouldn't have that be the crux of your decision necessarily, though.
Well, I'd like to see the Community Development Department, I think Just Run is in the audience, I'd like to see them focus on getting some additional funding for these programs. Those, we're on that cycle.
Do you want his feedback on that?
Yeah.
Jess, you here?
Cycle.
Well, Jess can tell us. When is the cycle, Jess, and can the council pre-direct those monies?
Mayor Quintero, members of the City Council, as you recall, on March 24th, you approved the annual plan for the 09-10 year, so all of the public social service funds have been appropriated. It just so happens that we are coming to you in 2 weeks with a revised plan for an additional $98,000 that we received in CDBG funds from the U.S. Congress after you approved the annual plan. So we'll be back with some recommendations that the advisory committee has made, which will amount to $17,000 extra in social service funds that are available. That, again, the committee's made their recommendations, and so we'll present those recommendations to you. So there will be that opportunity if you were interested in that. Otherwise, the planning cycle for the regular CDBG program will begin again in November of this year with the RFPs, and then the recommendations will be made approximately March of 2010 for the 2010-2011 CDBG funds. And as it relates to the PALs and the STAR program, you may recall the STAR program in particular was operated by a nonprofit organization for a number of years, probably for 10 years. First, by Catholic Charities in cooperation and collaboration with the police department. And yeah, the police presence is the crux of the mentorship program, and that's what it was. And then Catholic Charities transferred the program to Salvation Army. Then Salvation Army transferred the program fully to the police department because both organizations wanted to go in a different direction. We can, as an option, we can try to RFP to a local nonprofit organization, again, to work either with parks or the police department to continue to run those programs. Their funding levels are between $30,000 and $35,000 a year for each program. What CDBG funds does not pay for is police department staff salaries, so it's all hourly workers that they have to hire to coordinate the programs.
The 98,000, 17 for social services, and the rest for CIP.
Correct. Yeah. Well, again, we're restricted to that 15% of the entitlement. Yeah.
Can we grow the pot? I mean, when we go to Washington, I know Captain Eady is there. We have extensive meetings with the Justice Department and their COPS program. Is there any opportunity to go back there and put some more pressure with our great advocacy team that we send up there from the city of Glendale to obtain some additional funding that may fill this gap, or perhaps in outgoing years maybe we can advance the money and backfill it? What are the prospects on that?
Well, Mr. Mayor and members of council and Councilman Najarian, yes, the potential's there to ask for the money, of course, but it would have to be included in the list of prioritized requests that the city's setting forth to our congressmen and the senators at the time that we request them. The problem with most of your grant funding that come through law enforcement is that it is seed money. It can't be added to an existing program. And that's precisely how this program was started. It was seeded, and there hasn't been the sustainment funding available because the grants very seldom address those. But we can most certainly attempt to include it in our wish list next year that we go back with.
Maybe we can create a new description of the type of funding that would not make it seem as though it's a continuation of the previous funding, if that's their restriction.
Well, the actual problem would be is that you're still funding the same program.
We'll name it a new program if we have to. I think
reinvent the wheel.
We're the boxing program, a leather working class, or
or create a new master program and include some certain items as.
Do your best, Captain. If you can take another look at grant opportunities and funding requests, I'm sure council will do everything we can to support it. If you need a modification of a program description that makes it seem entirely different than what we were using the money for previously, I think we're all ready to do that. So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Mr. Weaver.
Don't anybody forget, if the police took a 5% pay increase and gave 1% back, that's $350,000, and we wouldn't be sitting here talking about finding $50,000, $70,000. 1%. Think about it. Our PD should get 5% and 1. No, they want 6. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. It is wrong. And I love the police department, but you are wrong. If you're listening out there, and I'm sure you are, wake up. Help this community if you care about it. I was born here like Mr. Draymond. By God, we want to keep it the way it is. For you officers sitting out there to say, no, we need 6% so we can retire in comfort, by God, get off the dime. Geez, give back 1%. We'd have our cops, we'd have our SRO. It's just unbelievable. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, folks, police out there. That's the way I feel. You're not giving it all. Mr. Mayor, can we adjourn now?
Mr. Draymond has a comment.
Well, it has to do with the direction that you were asking. I am not clear from my conversations with at that meeting with the superintendent and the president of the school board that what they were saying is that high schools, we want high schools versus middle schools. As a matter of fact, I tried to draw them out on that specific topic, and the answer back was in several ways. I tried several times, and the answer came back each time, we need to have some conversation about that. So I encourage that conversation to take place, whether it's our police staff and our finance staff, whatever. We need to have that conversation with them. So I'm not sure it's a matter of high schools, and if we can get one into the middle school. Dating myself, calling it a junior high school, a middle school. But I want to see 4. So I agree with that as well. I think you're hearing a consensus up here on that. As to where they go, I just want to make sure that the police department gets in touch with the school board and finds out where they believe those resources are best allocated. And then with all due respect, I'm still not hearing what I need to hear in terms of how it may be a small dollar amount, but we haven't tied up that dollar amount.
Oh, that's right.
And so it's to say, Chief, do you have what you need? I'm sure you do, in the sense that we're talking about a 5% reduction, but how that happens, I'm not hearing a consensus on that up here. But perhaps that'll happen along the way. I don't know.
I mean, if I may interrupt, I mean, I feel so strongly about the SRO that I'm willing to replace the vice officer funding and substitute that to the SRO. I mean, that's if I have to weigh the two, I mean, I think the money is best spent at the SRO interaction with the students than someone who is investigating potential gambling and prostitution issues.
I agree. I just have a question, though. When we talk about doing that, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that we are eliminating another position? Are we laying off another sworn officer? What does that actually mean? That's what.
Well, trying, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Draymond, trying to keep up with the little bit of the bouncing numbers here. By my math, if you accepted the chief's recommendations in all respects, with the exception of you would keep the 4th SRO position, but you would eliminate the sergeant, so you'd move from sergeant but keep a 4th SRO position. I still have a gap of about $126,000. So the question becomes, if you direct the chief to make additional cuts in the department to $126,000, he'll go do that. It's not a whole vice officer. One vice officer is, probably total cost well over $200,000.
About 170.
About 170.
Yes.
How many vice officers do you have currently?
We have 2 assigned, Mr. Mayor.
I just, I don't feel like I have enough information to be able to make a decision like that. I don't know day to day, if we get rid of a vice officer, does that mean gambling dens open up all over the city? Or, we don't have those statistics of how many busts they have, what they spend their days doing. So, I just feel like I'm not in a position. I'd have to defer to you. You're the one who has the intimate knowledge of what those officers are doing day in and day out, and what the SROs are doing day in and day out. So I'm not prepared to make that decision.
Yeah, following that line of thinking, I agree. Basically, I would say just find another position somewhere within the department and move that person or position, eliminate it, and let's stick with 4 SROs. Mr. Draymond.
Yeah, I have to say, first of all, I think we all understand that what our vice officers are doing is not just, seeking out places where gambling is going on. It's far broader than that.
Yes.
And so I guess what I'm trying to say to Councilmember Najarian, who was helping bring the debate forward, as much as I want to see a 4th SRO, I'm not sure that eliminating vice is the way to do it. Now I'm hearing find another position somewhere. I'm more inclined to go with that than I am to say let's cut the vice unit in half. So.
And the only reason I say that is they were previously offered up as not being essential to the core
I understand.
services. So that's where I got that vice idea.
I know, and I understand that. It's, I think back to last year when what was offered up was the COPS program. We opted not to go that way. So, anyway.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, my suggestion would be that you allow us to go ahead and take that SRO sergeant's position and downgrade it. We will use that position to reinstate the 4th SRO, which has been cut. It is no longer there. It's already gone. So we will reinstate that 4th position, and we'll find a way to make up the difference somewhere in our budget.
Okay. All right. We have enough, Mr. Starbird?
So we will. So the idea is we will leave that other vice position in place.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I would recommend at this point you do that.
But we've got to find a.
The PD will still be responsible for an identified $126,000 additional reductions in their budget.
Right. And we will be. And I think the consensus is, Mr. Mayor, that we are the outreach the STAR, PAL, and so on will stay in place.
They remain.
Okay. I'm very happy with that. All of that.
We'll do so.
Okay, any other comments? Well, let me just say that I think the police have done a masterful job, as well as, once again, the staff, Mr. Elliott, McFall, et cetera, et cetera. However, stay tuned, folks, because in the next few months,
we're not done.
Your personal friends in the area around Sacramento are going to creatively come down and attempt to kill us. So
just when you think you put this budget to bed, it's going to get them walk around again, I suspect.
Right, but anyway, this is a great first effort, that's for sure. I have a motion.
Thank you very much.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned.